Aloha. Welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Interviews with people who have special insights into education from preschool all the way through adulthood. I'm Jim Shon. We're streaming live every Wednesday at noon. We post our shows on YouTube and on the Hawaii Educational Policy Center website. Our special guest today is a lifetime in research on education issues, particularly with Native Hawaiians, Katherine Tibbetts. Welcome to the show.
Oh, aloha, Jim. It's great to be here.
Yeah?
Honored to join you.
Tell me a little bit about your background in education and how you sort of drifted into or dived into educational research.
I think it's been a series of fortuitous steps. I didn't have a plan, but things worked out as they often do. So I wanted to be in education from the time I was, before I entered school. I thought that education was the most important work we could do. But when I graduated from college, there was a recession and a teacher glut. I thought I was going to go off to get a master's degree in special education, but that didn't work out with the economy the way it was at that time. And the teacher market, but I got a job in social work. And that has colored, I think, my whole orientation to education. So in 1985, I was in the master's program in social work at the University of Hawaii, and was recruited to work on educational evaluation at Kamehameha Schools. So, and I was there for 30 years, just recently retired from Kamehameha.
Well, congratulations on your
Thanks.
retirement. I am interested in how perhaps special ed and social work might have changed the way you look at data, the way you look at education. Many of the people I've interviewed, not because of special ed, they started in special education. So can you talk a little bit about how social work and special ed might change the way a researcher looks at educational data?
I think it's a really interesting question, because many of the people that I hang out with at evaluation conferences that I've worked with on different evaluation efforts actually come from evaluation in social work. And I think that the social work orientation gives us a really unique disposition to look at the individual, to look at their context, to be responsive to different kinds of the values and goals and aspirations that are much more particular than global. Yeah, and so I think I bring that to my work as an educational program evaluator and educational researcher. Has really colored and shaped the way that I do my work, and it's led me to be involved nationally and maybe with the toe into international work in culturally responsive evaluation work and culturally responsive assessment work.
I see. So, and you've been working really on Native Hawaiian research for most of these years, right?
I have, yes. And for me personally, education was, a gateway to a different kind of future than what my parents could have imagined. My father hadn't finished high school, my mother had, so I was first generation high school on my father's side. So their pathway was, high school, family, work. So, education's been really important in my life, and I've always believed that education was important because of the potential to increase equity and opportunity for others. So I've been really drawn to doing that throughout my career.
And you were sharing with me earlier that you actually come from a Native American background as well?
Yes, I do. Yeah, my grandparents are Eastern Abenaki. It's not a recognized or registered tribe, but we know it's there. We know who we are.
And where are the Abenaki originally from?
They're in New England and up the eastern Canadian seaboard.
I see.
So Eastern Abenaki are east of the St. Johns River. Yeah.
Now, many times data for Native Americans and Hawaiians and Alaskans are kind of lumped together or talked about in the same way. Do you see, is that justified, Liz? Let me ask that.
I think it can be helpful sometimes from a statistical perspective to aggregate numbers and groups to get a better sense of it overall. It becomes less than helpful when then we start to say, we forget that these are abstractions and generalizations, and we expect people and individuals to behave according to these kind of synthetic models that we create. So I think it's good. It has its uses, but it also has its limitations. As long as we are aware of and mind the limitations and use it responsibly, it can be helpful. So just like there's no monolithic indigenous culture per se, but there are some important similarities that tend to occur across different indigenous groups. And so being able to talk about it in that way, understanding the limitations of us, helps us find common ground and strength across groups.
Do you think that Native American and Hawaiian and Alaska, other indigenous groups, are they similar? Excuse me. Are they similar to other minorities, or do they have a separate kind of connection with each other?
That's an interesting question. When I was working with others to create the Indigenous Peoples and Evaluation Topical Interest Group, we had some pushback from some of the members of the Minority Issues and Evaluation Group. This was several years ago. They were concerned that it was like dividing and splitting, and they didn't understand why Indigenous group would want to have a separate identity. And I think the major reason for that was that Indigenous groups, at least theoretically, they had the experience of being colonized as opposed to being voluntary or involuntary immigrants. But the colonization process and experience is special to them. And they also have, most often, putative rights, not always realized rights, to sovereignty, and to a greater degree of self-determination, under the law. So that they have many of the same issues of marginalization and disenfranchisement, but the issues of colonization and sovereignty are unique to the Indigenous peoples.
Do you see patterns of academic and otherwise connections between the experience of Native Americans and Hawaiians in education? I mean, some of the data looks similar, actually.
The data are very similar, and it's also similar to that for many minority populations. And I think a lot of it stems back, again, to those experiences of colonization, loss of identity, culture, land, marginalization that's social and economic and cultural. So, yeah.
So what I was wondering is, a number of years ago, I was involved with a program that dealt with minorities in healthcare. And one of the challenges was, who is who? In this case, it was a debate, actually, as to whether or not certain students, in this case it was college, were Native Hawaiian, or were they actually whatever they decided to be, because so many had multi-ethnic backgrounds. And so there was kind of a debate. Well, if they're a little bit Hawaiian, we're going to count them. But others said, no, we must respect how they want to see themselves. So I guess my question is, how do you determine in research, you or others, who is Hawaiian? Is it just a tiny little bit, or is it self-identification, or what?
It really varies based on context, and different groups collecting data use different definitions. So for example, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs uses a blood quantum definition, which is written in, I'm sorry, not Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the Hawaiian Homes uses a blood quantum definition that's written into the law. But as far as I know, I don't think anybody else relies on blood quantum. One of the, and I think that that's consistent with the way I understand Hawaiian culture, not being Native Hawaiian myself, but that it tends to be very inclusive and open, although that's not, there are probably times and places for more exclusive, where Hawaiians need to take charge and need to do things for themselves, by themselves. And that's a right that they should be able to preserve and to act upon. But in terms of identification, I think, I know that statistically we get very different results if we ask what is your ethnicity or your dominant ethnicity is often called, and we give people a few choices, one choice or maybe three choices, or if we ask a follow-up question that asks, are you Hawaiian or part Hawaiian? And they check out, we pick up like another 25% of people who will say,
you ask that question.
Just based on how you ask the question. So it really depends on the context and the purpose behind the question and the goal, the understanding of context and the goals of the person who's answering it. So I really, personally, I believe it should be up to the individual to define.
But if you're dealing with census data, they lump together Asian Pacific Islander, and I mean, it's a huge multi-ethnic group that they lump together, yeah?
They do in most of their reports. However, they have started collecting data beginning in 2000 at a much more detailed level. So it is possible, not in the published, in most of the published reports will be Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. They've broken out the Asian Pacific Islander group in the last couple censuses. But you can't, there are tools on the census website that allow you to dive down deeper, and you can identify people who identify solely as Hawaiian or Hawaiian in combination with anything else to get those data. So published reports are limited, but the actual data that's available to be mined by the public, it's anonymous but mineable. You can actually get to Hawaiian alone or Hawaiian in combination with some other race.
So in Hawaii, living in Hawaii, how many Hawaiians are there? Roughly, obviously.
In the 2010 census, there were roughly 290,000 Hawaiians in Hawaii. But interestingly, that is only about half, it's 55%. 45% of Native Hawaiians in the United States live in one of the other 49 states. Most of those are in California or Washington. Those are the biggest, the areas with the largest populations.
And do you find data on them parallels data on Hawaiians living in Hawaii?
For Native Hawaiians living outside the state, it's very difficult to get data outside of what's reported to the census because they're not a large enough part of the population for state and local agencies to break out the Hawaiian group as a special subgroup.
Oh, I see.
So, but demographically, Hawaiians living in the continent and in Alaska tend to be a little younger, a little bit more educated, but it's still a widespread. And as we see more and more out-migration from Hawaii, expected that groups may become more increasingly similar.
So of the 290,000 in Hawaii, how many of them would be under the age of 18? You know, students, or in the K-12 system anyway.
In the K-12 system, there are about 80,000 Native Hawaiians. Yeah, in that K, I believe it's 80,000 in the K-12 age range.
I recall in the DOE, roughly there's about 26% are Hawaiian or part Hawaiian.
Right.
Yeah, which is a very large percentage of just about any group, actually.
It is, yeah. It is one of the largest ethnic groups, if not the largest, as it continues to grow and expand. And the Native Hawaiian population tends to be younger than the general population, which means they're likely to become an increasingly large portion of the public school enrollment over the years.
A kind of boomer going through the system a little bit.
Kind
Boomer
of,
group,
yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to me that a lot of minority groups are younger as a percentage, so they have many, many more younger folks than older, and they are going to have an impact on our education system in a very significant way, I suppose.
They are. They're having a big impact, and understanding and addressing the needs of the different ethnic groups, I think, is really critical to success in Hawaii, perhaps more than any other state.
Well, we are talking with Kathy Tibbetts about educational research on Native Hawaiians in the state of Hawaii. Fascinating discussion of just who is Hawaiian and how many they are. And we'll be talking more about the deeper issues and the more profound issues that relate to education and in any minority group, but especially Hawaiians. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Hi, my name is Cindy Matsuki, and I host the show High Growth with HTDC on ThinkTech Hawaii. This is the show where we talk about all things tech, innovation, entrepreneurship, and manufacturing, because there's so many things going on in Hawaii and more people should know about them. So this is the program that you can come and find out about all the things happening in Hawaii. And this show also airs on Olelo 54 along with ThinkTech Hawaii. And it broadcasts live every other Tuesday at 3 p.m. So don't forget, check out the show Tuesday, 3 p.m. every other week. High Growth with HTDC. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. That's Ted Ralston. Ted is the host of Where the Road Leads. It shows every Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. It's about technology. It's about how people collaborating and solve problems with modern technology. It's where the road leads. We all know that. We should all be listening. Join us there, 4 to 5 p.m. every Friday. Now, what about that do you agree with?
All of it.
I knew he'd say that. Aloha. Say aloha.
Aloha.
Good.
Aloha, welcome back to Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. We're talking with Kathy Tibbetts, who brings a social work, ed psych sort of academic background looking at data. And I wanted to talk a little bit about assessments, because there's been a new report come out that's kind of comprehensive from Kamehameha Schools. And it's not your typical just educational look at math scores and other scores. It's very broad. So talk a little bit about your approach to assessments and what that has to look like to be authentic.
Okay. Well, first about this series of reports. So the most recent volumes in those series have been called Kahuaka'i. They're part of the Native Hawaiian Educational Assessment. They're freely available on the Kamehameha Schools website. But their roots go back to 1983. And it goes back to the vision of Pinky Thompson and Senator Inouye. They recognized the disparate kinds of outcomes for Native Hawaiians and felt a need to address those and a need to garner resources to help address those needs. And so back in around 1980, Kamehameha Schools stepped forward and said they would conduct and publish the assessment. And it was called Native Hawaiian Educational Assessment, but because all aspects of well-being are very interconnected, they really looked at social and economic conditions, physical well-being, cultural well-being, economic well-being. So it was this broad look that focused on education because of being Kamehameha Schools, and because those two gentlemen saw education as a pathway toward progress, as did Keali'i Puahi Bishop. So that was the major focus, but we recognize always that all of those are interconnected. And so this latest volume, the fourth in the series, continues to carry forward that tradition.
So You obviously didn't have to be tapping data that is very diverse. Is there some of that data that's harder than others to tease out?
There can be. There's the data that's reported is primarily what we call in research secondary data. So it's data that somebody else has collected and that we're pulling together and synthesizing.
Mm-hmm.
The education data have been pretty straightforward. We have a good working arrangement with them. One of the challenges, though, is that sometimes state agencies and more often federal agencies that mandate certain data collection will change their definitions, and
Mm-hmm.
they change what's being required of states to report. So you have to have a deeper understanding of the data to know that although these two numbers appear to be representing the same thing, they're actually different, that the definitions have changed over time. There's been a lot of changes we find in corrections.
Mm-hmm.
The correction systems data tends to change a lot in terms of how different crimes are classified and organized, and how different things are counted. So that's one area that we have to be really careful in. But we've had great cooperation across multiple agencies, providing us sometimes going beyond what's publicly available on their websites that they publish for their purposes to help us dive deeper into some of the data in order to focus more closely on Native Hawaiians.
Now, I know that under the education part, the cognitive achievement, you're still looking a lot at big test scores, math, language, and whatnot. And that's part of No Child Left Behind, and that's where the secondary data comes from. But I've got to believe that that's not really a complete story of educational achievement or skills or abilities or talents.
No, I hope that nobody does believe that the purpose of education is to pass the test. But there has been a lot increasing pressure on the test, I think, which makes it difficult for educators to do their jobs, to address the needs of the whole child and to be responsive to individual children's different developmental speeds and progress and statuses. So we really struggle, I think, in education quite a bit. We do have some, though, I think, really bright opportunities that are really visible. And so I think some of those are the Board of Education policies. So there's policy 2104 that talks about Native Hawaiian education, Hawaiian education for all students. So what is it students need to know and understand about Hawaii if they're going to be graduates of the Hawaii public schools? The second thing is 2105, which increases support for the Hawaiian immersion programs. And particularly this year has been really great with getting assessments for students, again, reading and math focus, but in Hawaiian language for the younger students who may not have the English vocabulary or able to make the translation kind of in terms of concepts from what they're learning in a Hawaiian immersion program into a test written for students being instructed in the English medium in a traditional curriculum. So the Board of Education was really generous in supporting that. They also created the Office of Hawaiian Education this year, appointed Don Kawi-Sang as its director with a mission to advance education about things Hawaiian, and also for Hawaiians, which I think is really important. And they enacted a new policy, E3, Na Hopena Ao, which is an ends policy, a little bit different from the general learner outcomes that we're used to, where this ends policy, written in Hawaiian, reflecting a Hawaiian worldview, talks about ends, but they're intended to impact not only individual learners, but the adult workers in the education system and the system itself. And those focus in on aspects of like belonging, aloha, engagement, and I'm going to run out of.
Yes, there's a
I
word
did
there
go through-
that
yes.
each letter is a symbol,
Each,
yes.
each
yes.
letter is a symbol.
Yes.
Yeah, but you know, but saying that this kind of the Hawaiian worldview that's reflected in this is a really important outcome for learners and an important way of operating as an education system in Hawaii.
Can you give one or two examples of the difference between that Hawaiian stated outcomes and more our traditional way of assessing students or looking at their...
Not yet in particular, but I do know there is a group that is with DOE's blessing and BOE's blessing, and that is going to be working on starting to define those and talk about what they look like and how we understand and assess those at those different levels of student, school, and system level.
So
That work is starting this fall.
So we have the standards and the rubrics and the big tests that every student takes, right? Math and language, right? Maybe science eventually, something like that. We also have immersion schools where the challenge is, well, what is a fourth grade vocabulary for, biology?
Right, right.
Which is an amazing challenge I got to imagine. And now you've got this other overlay of an obligation by the state to ensure all our students are somewhat knowledgeable in Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian history and other things like that. And also something specifically for Hawaiian children, it sounds like, if it's written in Hawaiian. And it doesn't compete with, but it informs the other sort of more Western standards.
I think so, and I think that's one of the challenges is whether we view it as an overlay, so here's one more thing you have to attend to, or is this something that helps you, it's kind of a glue that helps to hold everything else together.
Yeah.
And so I think it will be successful to the extent that we're able to integrate it into kind of a way of being, a way of teaching, a way of behaving in the schools. In terms of the kinds of soft skills and other kinds of outcomes that we're reinforcing, because the kind of like harder skills of reading and math are really not particularly meaningful until they're accompanied by those soft skills that are around relationship and around values that help us use our knowledge in meaningful and productive ways.
I also know that for areas like project-based learning, STEM is one of the more common words. Actually using one's hands and creating and being innovative resonates with certain students more than others. And it does strike me that the project-based learning, or ho'ike, I think is known in Hawaiian, demonstrating that you know how to do something, that this is not well integrated into most of our classrooms, really. It's sort of on the outside. If you're really good at fixing cars, we'll never know. And even if you're really good at music, you might make it into the band, but it won't be reflected in the statistics, right? There must be a lot of those important holistic child dynamics that we haven't brought in yet.
Yeah, and when we looked at, in a project that Kamehameha and DOE did collaboratively, there's also some reports on that on the Kamehameha Schools website, called Successful Schools for Native Hawaiians. It was earlier years in the No Child Left Behind reform efforts. And so one of the things that we observed, although that wasn't the intent of the project, was that people were reporting that the requirements of No Child Left Behind were forcing out many of the practices that you really might consider best educational practices, because they were so focused on test scores.
Yes.
And in particular, the multiple choice, on-demand reading and math assessments, and not how can you understand this and apply this in a broader, more real world or authentic kind of context. So many of those practices are less prevalent today than they would have been before 2000 and before NCLB really started impacting the classrooms deeply. I think that as a nation, this is something that we have to deal with. I think that as a community with Hawaiian traditions to draw upon, we have some really good models for how to do that kind of authentic learning and authentic assessment. Yohoiki, that demonstration of knowledge, is one of those really important ways. And I think it's really imperative for the future of the U.S. economy education system that we find our way back from this deconstruction of education into multiple choice tests and items to more meaningful units of work and knowledge.
Well, we've been talking with Kathy Tibbetts about how you assess authentically, holistically, a child's education, particularly Indigenous children and Native Hawaiians. And we'll be back in 1 minute.
Aloha, how you doing? I'm Gordo the Tech Czar here on ThinkTech Hawaii, where we co-host Hibachi Talk, where we talk about technology and bring in all kinds of cool guests. Also, my co-host with me today is
Andrew the security guy. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching ThinkTech Hawaii, and thanks for watching Hibachi Talk. We also have Angus.
And you there, lad. It's Angus. I bring in all kinds of wee things. Oh, look, you can see my lips moving.
Aloha, my name is Miley Scarpino and I'm the host of the Empower Hour. If you're interested in health, nutrition, fitness, here on the island of Oahu, want to learn more about places to train at or different trainers available, then watch my show on Fridays at 3. We have a great time and I hope that you'll come join us. Much aloha, now go get swole!
Aloha, welcome back to Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. We're talking with Katherine Tibbetts about assessments. And I wanted to ask you, we have, obviously Kamehameha Schools is there. We have immersion schools, but we also have a movement that started with the charter community, maybe almost half of them, that are Hawaiian-focused schools. What's going on with them and where do they fit in this?
I think that charter schools are intended, well, they have different intentions depending on your audience. So I think for government, for education systems, charter schools are meant to be laboratories of innovation where new practices are tried out and possibly migrate then into general education to improve quality of education in the general system. For families and communities, charter schools offer a choice to choose an educational program that matches your particular values and goals for your child or your child's learning style, gives you an alternative if they're not thriving in a regular public school, are some of the different reasons. Some more proactive and some more reactive.
Right.
Increasingly, legislators have been looking, though, at charter schools as the cheap option. So, we don't give charter schools quite as much money, whether it's because of lack of support for facilities or other kinds of things, but they're cheaper. And so that's a new perspective, I think, that's been working its way into the equation. But talking about charter schools from an empowerment kind of perspective and offering choice, Kamehameha has been working to support the Hawaiian culture-based charters, some of whom are immersion schools, most of whom are not, to develop alternative assessments. And we had, I think, a really open audience from the Charter School Commission in terms of their interest in what is it we can do and how can we assess student learning in different ways. And we've been really, really pleased. We've launched a 3-year program for entering our second year of that program to develop assessments that wrap around. We understand the importance of the reading and the math and those kinds of test scores and things that are in the Strive High, things like attendance, timely graduation, that come out of the NCLB and now are in what the Dewey calls a Strive High report. But we're trying to wrap around that with Hawaiian cultural perspectives for these schools. So we are looking at what does readiness for the next level look like from a Native Hawaiian cultural perspective? What are the important aspects of readiness as a child moves through the system? We're looking at how are students connected to their culture and their community? And how are they giving back? One of the ways is through giving back to that community. And how is that disposition building across years and in different kinds of ways? And a third aspect we're looking at are what are kinds of assessments of particular that we can develop of learning outcomes that may be particular to a school. So getting those kinds of supplemental outcomes in. And it's sometimes a bumpy road because the charter schools are all about grassroots and empowerment, and the commission in this current iteration has a very heavy and very clear responsibility for accountability to the system. So there can be points of a little bit of tension and a little rough spots to work through, but generally everybody wants the same thing for the kids, which is a high quality education. And we appreciate the willingness of the commission to entertain different ideas and different approaches and their feedback on what they view as quality. So we're really pleased with that. So we hope that at the end of 3 years, we will have pilot tested and field tested some assessments in these areas that are very robust and are very welcomed and accepted by the general education community.
Well, I mentioned STEM earlier. Or let's say something like robotics. You don't take a test to see if you're any good at it. You build something and it performs, right?
Yeah, which is a whole ike.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
yeah.
right, yeah. If you're going to be a musician, you don't take a test, you audition maybe, right? And experts evaluate you. And it does seem to me that as an outside observer to this, a lot of Hawaiian traditions are the kapuna, the experts evaluating skills, competencies. And even at the college level, people are beginning to talk about competency-based learning, where you're demonstrating certain things. In history, you write a history. In science, you go to the science fair, whatever. So my question is, are these sort of demonstrable processes with experts watching and evaluating? Is that what you mean by new assessments, or is it more in a traditional way where you're somehow teasing out test data that's broader than what we have?
I think there's room for both. So if we're looking for discrete bits of knowledge and things, or then what we think of as tests are appropriate and are efficient. But if we're looking for complex performances, then we need the kinds of things that you're talking about, where we have expert judgment, where we're using rating scales that are multidimensional. In education, we call those rubrics.
Yeah.
So we have, maybe 5 different aspects of a quality performance, and from a novice level to an expert level, what does it look like? So using those kinds of things, whether they are done in a holistic sense in the mind of an expert, so a kumuhula when you're going to unike to graduate would be an example of that, or whether they're made more explicit and public and shared. So that teachers can share, and you can share with the students what does, so if you're performing in a novice level on this, what does the intermediate level look for? What is your next step? So I think we'll see a lot more that apply to complex and integrated performances that, a lot of jargon, but that really resemble real world tests, the things that we actually want people to be able to do.
So, it always struck me that if you did very well in the state science fair, In some cases, these students, Kamehameha students and others, are, communicating with MIT experts and doing research that the judges at the science fair, their jaws are just dropping. I don't even understand what's going on, but the student is way ahead of me. That sort of experience isn't counted in any formal way as success. Nor is it if you become first chair in Youth Symphony 1 or whatever. And I'm wondering if simply expanding the realms of importance is part of that process.
It is, I think, changing the things that count and like you said, expanding on that, to look at, how do you understand a complex ecology of, say, a mahapua'a? Or how do you understand ways of tending and nurturing and caring for that? Are some of the kinds of things we've done. We have students at charter schools who do create hula dramas each year that talk about part of their either ancient or contemporary history, and that are acted out through hula. So it requires integrating a lot of different things. So the artistry of the hula, the chant, but also understanding social and political kinds of forces and cultural identity, naturally. So I think more and more, as we start to look at these other important outcomes, and then we need more sophisticated ways than the multiple choice test, which is basically a measure that was introduced around World War II as a matter of economy for quickly sorting out military recruits into different lines of work. So going back to deeper and more meaningful kinds of ways of looking at it. So it has both of those dimensions of changing or adding to what it is we're assessing and counting, and then assessing it in ways that really give us useful information about what people know and can do.
I imagine also that if you're going to take time out of the school day, and charter school teachers are under the same contract and as others, you're competing for time. And it seems like a lot of these authentic ways of assessing take more time. You have to go out to the lo'i and the ahupua'a, you have to get on the bus, and you have to do things that are much more actually logistically time-consuming than sitting in the classroom.
They take more time in that sense, but on the other hand, but when they're integrated with the instruction, the flow of the curriculum and instruction, what students are doing, then they kind of take less time than pulling them for 5 or 10 days out of the school year to sit in front of a computer and take a multiple choice test. So they can be integrated, and it can be very, very efficient because it becomes just part of the curriculum.
Well, that's a fascinating statement, because I've always seen people frame this as a tension between authentic learning, ho'oike, versus kind of classroom seat time. And I think that's an important insight, that you're learning ways to deal within that system to bring these new ideas and new assessments. We've been talking with Dr. Katherine Tibbetts about Hawaiian educational research and authentic assessments. Thank you very much for bringing this to us. We'll be back again next week. Aloha.